Hello YouTube and welcome to my second tutorial on shading. I told you guys there'd be a separate one on shading and highlights, so here it is. Again, if there's any questions that I didn't really explain, please just write it down in the comments and I'll answer it right back. And if there are some things that you'd like me to work on in the tutorial, for next tutorial, some things you don't like, please let me know why so I can and please let me know what they are so I can adjust for further tutorials and make them better. So without further ado, let's start. And shading and highlights. Here are our 5 little rules that we want to talk about first before we get into it and go into detail and show you how to do it. But I say how to do it, I should correct that. This tutorial is more where the shadows and highlights should be. Not necessarily, all right, let's pick up this marker and color this in this spot and then take a darker color and, for example, take this color, do this, and do that, do that. That's not really what this tutorial is going to be like. I'm not going to really tell you what to do. I'm just going to show you with 4 different drawings, 4 different images, and kind of explain my thought process in doing it and where the lights and shadows and highlights should be. So number 1, establish a light source. That's pretty obvious and basic, but it's actually very important, and it's the first thing you got to think about. Where's the light coming from? Okay, so if I have a ball, I'm going to use a ball again because it's such an easy example. Let's say I have a ball. I want the light coming from this side. So we're going to have a highlight right here. Highlight. And it's going to have a shadow over here. And then we're going to have a shadow being cast right here. So we have a highlight right here, light source, sorry, not light source, right here. The highlight is going to be right here. The shadow is going to be right here. And this shadow it casts is going to be a lot smaller. If you look at images of objects, when light is directly above it, it casts a very small shadow below it. Versus over here, it has a very big shadow. So keep that in mind. Looking at images on Google Images to see how light hits certain objects is very helpful, and I do advise doing that when you're drawing whatever you're drawing. So we have our light source. Now what? We want to be able to look at and identify the peaks and the lows within our drawing. So the peaks, the high points, are obviously going to have light. Even if light's hitting over here, or up top here, or from over here, generally the light's going to be over here. And it's going to have darkness or shadows in the low parts. So this would be the peak, and this is the low part. So if you have a shoulder, right? These are the deltoid or striations within the muscle. These 3 points are the high points, so there's going to be light on them. And then, so let's use our color. So there's going to be light here, and then it's going to get more of the neutral color of the skin here. And then in between each shoulder, if we were to look at it from a different angle, let's say this is one muscle bump, and the other one right here, and here's the third one, you're going to have the highlights here and the shadows in here. The shadows will be in here. So, I know this is pretty messy. Let's get rid of all that. So we're going to have our even darker color right here. And then our darkest color will be right in the cracks. So that's generally what it's going to look like. It's very sloppy, but I'm trying to do this in a timely manner. So that's the identifying the peaks and lows and highlights. So you want to make sure that you do have highlights. So in that situation, when you have these three colors, whoops, this is going to be our highlight color. And the highlight is usually at the highest point. So and they're really, really bright. So you want to keep in mind, if you're doing a black and white drawing, you want to leave the highlights just white. Just don't even shade it in with if you're doing black marker and gray markers, just leave the highlights white. If you're doing pencil, just leave the paper white. And then if you're doing color, you obviously want to get a very, very close to white color of that color. If it's like baby blue or green or pink, these would be considered highlights. So I hope that makes sense and you understand that. If you don't, please ask me in the comment section. And ways to shade. Like I just showed you, you want to use 3 to 4 colors and make a grayscale. So these are my swatches, so they're already saved, but you have your light colors and you want to just usually do this, create a grayscale. Now let's go even darker, why not? Does this make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. That's a nice grayscale. A grayscale is usually black and white, but this is not black and white, so, and then obviously you want to get to black. So, I mean, this is an example that wouldn't make sense. Does that make sense? Not really. This color shouldn't really be here. It's too pink. It's too red. So make sure when you're doing your grayscale, you look at it like this and take a look at all the colors. Does it flow through? Is it nice and smooth? Does it have a nice gradient? If you were to blend it, does it make sense? It's a terrible blending job, but you get the idea. And you always, when you draw your drawings, whether it's digital or markers, pencils, you want to use 3 to 4 colors. And you always want to make sure there's either a highlight or a shadow. So if you go with, this is your base color, and this is your second base color, you don't really want to, I mean, that's not really a shadow. That's not dark enough. Or even if we did, even if I did this, that's not the best shadow. You probably want to go a little darker. So that looks more like a shadow to me. Or if you don't want to do that, because some people are limited on colors, that's also why I draw a lot more on the tablet than on paper with Copic markers, is because I don't have this color wheel that I can pick any color from. So you may be limited on your colors, so you can't use 4 colors, so use 3 colors, and then just have your highlight and your 2 base colors, or your 2 base colors and your shadow. So any combination would be good. You don't have to have all 4, but obviously all 4 are the best. And if you have 5, 6, I mean, yes, it gets, if you want to do lines, it kind of gets a little bit weird if you were to, like Dragon Ball Z, the shadings are hard lines like this. It's not a blend. But if you do have a blending tool and you want to blend and you want to make it smooth like an airbrush tool, then obviously the more colors the better, because then you can smooth it out, right? Give it a nice blend like that, and then you can go darker, and then it starts to transition very smoothly. So if you have more than 4 colors, that's fine. You don't really need, you have an endless amount of colors if you have this smooth blending. But if you have a hard shadow or hard transition, this is what I mean by hard transition. Line, line, line to the next color. That's a hard transition. It's not a smooth or soft transition. Then you generally want to stick to 3 to 4 colors. Okay, so now step 5 is easy, right? It's the best part. We get to apply it. So I'm going to switch to a voiceover now, and hopefully this video is helpful for you. Alright, so now let's apply these examples to these 4 images that I drew, and keep in mind that these 4 images that I'm going to be coloring, touching up, are sped up. So if I start to talk fast or it seems off, it's because I'm doing a voiceover and I just wanted to save time so you guys didn't have to watch an hour video and I could shorten it a lot. So let's start off with the circle and get our 4 colors, establish a light source. It's going to be coming from the top, and we want our highlight to be at the top and our shadow to be at the bottom. So let's pick our 2 base colors, our highlight and our shadow color. Here's our first base. Make it a little bit darker and go get our second base. And then our shadow, and then our highlight. So we're going to take our second base and start adding it on the bottom, rounding it out towards the top. Get our shadow, color it on the bottom, go switching back and forth between the shadow and the 2 bases and making it look smooth. Then get our highlight, put it at the center on the top, get a white dot, just kind of smooth it out on top to indicate that's where the light is directly hitting. So now let's make the shadow beneath the ball, because that's where the shadow would be, by using grays and black. Start off with a warm dark gray, go darker, and then go to black and put that right under the ball. That's about it for the ball, so let's move to the rock. In general, drawing rocks are really, really hard because there's so much detail on them. And so let's establish a light source on the right side, coming from above. So generally the left side's going to be darker, but there are going to be some dark points in the center of the rock and all over, because rocks are jagged and not smooth and just create shadows all around. I'm just going around and adding a little bit more detail on the rock using different sizes of the brush to make it look more like a rock and have more details in the cracks of the rock and easier to establish highlight points. But as you can see, the rock generally is darker on the left side because the light is coming from the right. Add a little bit more highlights on top. When you're dealing with rocks and trees and stuff like this, it just takes a lot of time of just going over and over again and a lot of patience until it looks right, until you find that this is basically all I've done and can't do much more. Now I'm using a finer brush to have the shadows and highlights stick out a lot more. Now it does look a little bit fake, it doesn't look natural because it's so sharp, but that's why after I would go and blur it, or if you're doing it on a piece of paper, you could smear it with your hand, your finger, or a blending tool, a blending marker, anything like that if you're doing it on a piece of paper. Going in and adding a little bit more shadows with a bigger brush. And here I go and blend it right now. Smear it out a little bit so it doesn't look so sharp. Add some shadows. And then some highlights. That's about it for the rock. Looks good. Now let's move to the dragon eye. Now there are a lot of scales on a dragon or reptile or monster, whatever this is, whatever you want it to be. And with scales, you're going to have high points at the top of the scales and then low points in between the scales, which could be cracks on the skin and the horns right there above the eye. So I'm going to go in and darken those cracks. And I write it out, peak and trough, so you have the peaks are on the top of the scales. Go in right here and add some shadow in the cracks. Make the scales pop a little bit more. This is just very similar to the rock and any natural object you're going to draw. This just takes time and going over it a lot until you're happy with what you have. Now this is the bottom of the horns right above the eye. It's pretty dark right there, so that's why I go in and add some shadows there. Add some shadows on each of the scales near the cracks to give it a little bit more depth. Add some detail on the horns on top of his head, or spikes. So now I'm going to size up the brush and add a lot more shadows where it needs to be instead of specific shadows in between the cracks. Give it more general shading on the eye. The eye is round, so the center of the eye is going to be at the highest point, so it's going to be the brightest point, and then it gets dark as it goes towards the ends. Now I'm going to start adding some highlights on the top of the scales where the light source is coming from, and the horns above the eye and on the eye. And there's the glare from the light coming off the eye because the eye is really shiny and glossy. And this part of the top of the horns where I'm adding some white detail, that's as if like if this was in color it would be a very gray-blue as if light was coming off, reflecting off the horns from the sky. So just because you have a light source coming from the bottom of the face towards the eye doesn't mean there's not light coming from somewhere else. There's always light bouncing off of other things. So this light would be from the sky. Add some more highlights on the scales, on the horns. Now go in and add some dark spots, more shadows, bring out the contrast, more detail on the scales in between the cracks. It looks pretty good. Yep, and we'll call that done. So now let's move on to a Dragon Ball Z character. This is, I guess, Vegeta. It's pretty obvious with the hairline. So you want to have four colors, your two base colors, your dark color, which is your shadow, and then your highlight. So you want to use the lines in the hair as kind of cutoff points where you would have a light and dark. I'm just going to go in and use my second base color to fill in the parts where the light wouldn't be hitting because the light's coming from the left side, so I want to keep the left side of the hair light and the right side of the hair dark. So as you can see, the right side of Vegeta's hair doesn't have much of the second color. I'm going to go in and add the shadow, generally on the right side of his hair, and you can add the shadows on the lines drawn inside the hair. So I go around, find the lines, add shadows, generally on the right side because that's where the light is not. Now I'm going to add a highlight, and it looks good. So now we're going to do it with the other parts of the spikes of the hair. Again, add our second base. Have your highlight coming from that side, and then there's going to be no highlight on this side because the light shouldn't be hitting that side. So there's going to be a shadow. But you don't want to make it completely dark because, like I said, there's always light coming from somewhere else. It's just the light source isn't directly hitting that side. So that's why you wouldn't make it the darkest color you have. You still want to make it your base color, but you can use the darker of the base color. And like I have on the right side, your shadow, you don't need heavy shading on the right side, only if you want it a very deep contrast where literally only the left side has light and you want Vegeta's right side to be like almost black, like he's in the dark and has a flashlight pointing on him from the left side. That's basically when you would have the right side only the dark colors. But because that's not the case, you're going to have your base color pretty much all around. And then I'm not going to draw any attributes of the face like eyes, eyebrows, or nose, or mouth, because this is more general on how a Dragon Ball Z character's face just is shading. I wanted to be more general with Dragon Ball Z characters, so basically you could do this with any character. So the right side of the face is going to be darker, and then you have your shadow all the way to the right, and then you have your highlight all the way to the left. And then those triangles in the middle of the face are the cheekbones. It's usually dark on the top of the cheekbones. That's why I just have a little triangle. And in the center on the bottom is under his lip by the chin. And then you have above the eyebrows those two dark spots on the left and right side towards the top of the head. And then you have his ears. Sorry, I'm trying to catch up with myself. And then you have the ears, which you're going to have light on the outside of the ears with dark spots on the inside of the ears. And so once you follow those rules, your Dragon Ball Z character should be pretty easy to color. And that is about it. Alright, we are done with my second tutorial. If it was helpful, which I hope it was, please give me a thumbs up and tell me why you liked it and what was helpful about it. If it was not, please also let me know what wasn't helpful about it and what I could do to make the videos better. Lastly, before I end the video, I want to ask, please give me a thumbs up and share my drawing videos. It's really important to me that you guys share those because it does help a lot. It gets people who don't know about me to know about me, it gets my drawings exposed, and without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do this. So I really appreciate if you share the video, like the video, let people know about me and this channel, and so we can grow and become larger. I really appreciate it. Thanks. I'll see you next drawing.